Hello there, um, and welcome. First of all, just some housekeeping, some self-referential matter here. We've had a few subscribers join just in the last few days. Welcome. And we recently, I surpassed 1,000 views in the time I've been doing this, which of course is not a huge number. This has been going for about a year. I think the first post was mid-April of last year. Um, we're getting close to 30 videos. But I had no expectation that anybody would view these, and so 1,000 views in almost a year is borderline miraculous from my point of view. So thanks to those who are looking, who are watching, and I realize a lot of those views may be 5 seconds, and they get a sense of it and don't like it and turn it off and never come back. But I don't. But who knows? Um, anyway, those who subscribe, thank you, and I hope you'll keep watching. Hope you're getting something out of it because I sure am. Okay, so the poem we're going to look at today is one by Amiri Baraka, um, who wrote under his given name of LeRoi Jones for a while, and then somewhere along the line adopted the name Amiri Baraka. It is called The Liar. Baraka died in 2014. He was a poet and wrote, all kinds of different things, fiction, essays, etc. And was an activist in civil rights on racial matters. And he was a controversial figure at times a very, very controversial figure. And um, after I began to look at this poem and decided I might want to talk about it because I do like it very much. I did learn some things about positions he's taken, statements he's made that are uncomfortable to say the least. He's been criticized, condemned, and rightly, in my view, for some statements that were anti-Semitic, misogynist, some expressions of hatred and sadism, I would say, toward white people. Um, and I considered briefly not maybe choosing another poet, but I'm going to go ahead with it because, as I say, I do like the poem. I don't detect anything like that in this poem, and I do feel that worthwhile art can emerge from impure soil and art that's worth having. And I think this poem that we're going to look at today is very much worth having. It's about an aspect of the African American experience, which you should be able to detect immediately if you're watching this, is not my experience. Um, and this is a case, and I find this to be the case too. If I, for example, earlier on, I talked about a poem by um, Adrienne Rich that was about an aspect of woman's experience, which is also not my experience. And it's in these cases that you're not, except in the sense that you can relate on some level in terms of common humanity with the other person, there are going to be um, contours of the experience that are related to you and uh, dimensions of it that you never yourself do experience, and you are going to come up to a limit there. And um, as I think I've said before, that itself can be powerful and valuable to to realize that to have it to have in a sense your nose rubbed in the fact that you're not the measure of all things, and that you there are there are people, there are experiences that you can't really quote unquote relate to. I mean, to the extent that you consume art because you want to find something to relate to, and there is an aspect of that. As I say, there's a it's a common human connection, but there are more there are differences that we live under, historically constructed, socially constructed divisions that we live under, that do kind of in some ways place us in separate kind of walled gardens that aren't impervious um, to to entrance, but in a lot of ways it's very difficult uh, to understand the certain kinds of experiences of that sort, that in any kind of fine grained way it's just not possible. And I can think of a few moments and things I've read where I've had that experience. I think it's in as regards African Americans and the whole struggle with through the civil rights era and all through American history, to for African Americans to be recognized in their full humanity and full political rights and so on and so forth. I think there's a moment in Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, and just incidentally, he pronounced his name Du Bois, not Dubois, where I think I'm correct about this. He describes, I think it's in The Souls of Black Folks, that he, as a young man, in his late teens, but at any rate, as a young man, he um, has this kind of epiphany um, about and the full weight is borne down on him because of something that happens, or he just reaches a level of maturity where he can understand it, the full weight of what it means for him to be a black man in American society. Um, and it's this devastating moment. It's not as though he didn't know he was black to that point, but something of the full social and uh, existential implication of all that hit him like a ton of bricks. And I remember reading that, and it struck me really powerfully. And not because, of course, I was able to nod in recognition to what I was reading, because I can't. It was precisely because I couldn't. It was because my life has been immaculately uh, free of any kind of any kind of moment like that, any kind of startling recognition that there are these kinds of barriers in my life, and I'm in a way a figure constructed by a more powerful other. So it just so much that I've been able to take for granted in my life because I'm a white person, a white male. Um, there's another moment in um, I think it's a novel by James Baldwin. I think it's Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone. There's a point where I think it's set in the 40s or 50s. There's a point where some group of young men or characters in the book, young black men, have to go into Midtown Manhattan for one reason or another, and they coming down from Harlem, I think, and they have to be every moment engrossed in self consciousness and self awareness about every little movement and gesture that they're making. They can't their demeanor, their deportment. They can't. They're reminding themselves never meet um, the eye of any white person. Never look a white person in the eye. Don't put your hands in your pockets. All these little things where the tiniest gestures that could be read by a white person as threatening, and then lead to arrest and then God knows what. Um, that too is very powerful. I mean, I can absorb that information, and I can from the point of view of I can feel sympathy for those people in terms of common humanity, but the actual lived grain of that experience is something I do not and will not ever know. Um, and that's an experience that should, in my view, it shouldn't be greeted. Well, I just don't understand what that means. I can't relate to that. this is not for me. This isn't written for me. It is written for you. It's showing you a limitation that you have, and that experience should should lead to introspection. It shouldn't be wasted. Okay, that's enough sermonette. I'm going to read this poem. It's called "The Liar" by Amiri Baraka. Okay. What I thought was love in me, I find 1,000 instances as fear. Of the tree's shadow winding around the chair, a distant music of frozen birds rattling in the cold. Wherever I go to claim my flesh, there are entrances of spirit, and even its comforts are hideous uses I strain to understand. Though I am a man who is loud on the birth of his ways, publicly redefining each change in my soul, as if I had predicted them and profited biblically, even though their chanting weight erased familiarity from my face. A question, I think, an answer, whatever sits counting the minutes till you die. When they say it is Roy who is dead, I wonder who they will mean. Okay. Um, I think the overall drift of that is probably reasonably clear. It's an account of it's a reflection, an account of certain kinds of psychic discomforts and dislocations and um, a sense of self division or self alienation that is part of the African American experience. And um, the language from the very first gives you that sense. There's a note of disorientation or of errancy or instability that is struck at the outset just in that phrase. Here, let's read the first stanza again. What I thought was love in me, I find 1,000 instances as fear. Of the tree's shadow winding around the chair, a distant music of frozen birds rattling in the cold. So just those first three words. What I thought. Um, that phrase alone, I think, prepares you to learn that whatever it was that this voice, this mind, this consciousness thought is going to be revealed to him as an illusion, as a mistake, that what he thought, um, and it's in the past tense, what he thought, the thing that he thought belongs to the past and has been overtaken by a new reality, a new understanding. And then indeed that expectation is fulfilled. I find 1,000 instances as fear. What he thought was love was actually fear. Um, so right from the word go here, the speaker is, I guess I might say, shaken out of a complacency, maybe, in his conception of what love has been for him. Um, Love in whatever form, romantic love, filial love, that of friendship, etc. He's not specific. And it now stands exposed to him as something much more troubling, more estranging, something permeated by fear. Um, and then to sort of bear that out, we encounter some striking imagery and tropes and evocations of sound that begin to give shape to this compound of love poisoned by fear, or love that we should maybe no longer see as love, but simply as fear in its truest essence. Um, those lines are of the tree's shadow winding around the chair, a distant music of frozen birds rattling. Um, the tree is, of course, going to be associated with nature, and a chair is associated with the domestic scene, perhaps, and with rest and repose and comfort. Um, but a tree in the African American experience, and I don't think I'm pressing this too far, and I don't think I'm going too far with it. A tree has an association with lynchings in the African American experience. I imagine everyone has seen the ghastly photos of of such things, and a tree was typically what was used. So we've got this lurid association uh, with the tree, and it's casting a shadow that I think this is a really powerful image. It's casting a shadow that encircles the chair in a way that seems threatening and sinister. Um, it doesn't feel like a caress by any means, or any kind of harmonizing of these two elements. The chair and the tree, the shadow cast by the tree, or the natural and nature and civilization, or the domestic scene. It seems that um, the shadow that's being cast seems more in the nature of a deadly, suffocating coiling, um, of a sort that maybe boa constrictors are famous for. And it's an apt trope about what he's just said about love and fear. That I think he's coming to realize that he's perhaps been living in a kind of a fool's paradise, um, thinking of the love in his life as a comfort, and ignoring what's threatening in his experience that pursues him and disfigures him in his really in his deepest integrity, and and kind of warps him in this most fundamental and privileged human connection, namely love. Um, and again, that the tree may very well have an association for a very ready association for an African American with the racist violence and murder, that it betokens this warping of the African American's relation with nature itself. Um, and then the birds, they're frozen. Their song is distant and remote to him. It's rattling, not musical. It struggles to sustain itself in the cold. It's degraded by the cold. It's perverted by the cold. It's So these tropes suggest a being, I would say, a consciousness that has trouble finding any kind of grounding in nature, rather finds it inhospitable and forbidding and threatening, um, and embodying not a symbol or a standard of life, but rather one of decay, dissipation, something that bodies forth a shadow of mortality. Um, and then he goes on, wherever I go to claim my flesh, there are entrances of spirit, and even its comforts are hideous uses I strain to understand. So when he talks about claiming his flesh, I take that, I guess, to mean that when he um, has a sense of or insists upon his humanity and his self sovereignty, he senses spiritual, however that's defined for him, spiritual warrants or supports or validations, but even these bring alienation and opacity and perplexity, some kind of deep inner instability, and I would have to think it's because of him being precipitated in a, living as other in a society that constructs him that way, and has visited all kinds of atrocities and injustices upon him for that reason. He, to some extent, has to come to terms with that, and has to, some of those, that perspective is, he is going to internalize, and that this will cause some some sense, as I say, of self division and self alienation, of a sort that the dominant culture, the white culture, it is unknown to them. Um, he goes on, though I am a man who is loud on the birth of his ways, publicly redefining each change in my soul as if I had predicted them, and profited biblically, even though their chanting weight erased familiarity from my face. So in these lines, I think we have a sketch of the speaker as a public man, as a political activist, as a civil rights um, advocate. Um, you're seeing the face that he shows the world. You're seeing a self presentation um, that he is implying he displays to the outside world, and it shows little or none of the inner division and turmoil that we were getting a sense of in the prior lines. And he's you have I think I get this sense of him kind of looking at himself in that way and kind of beholding it from outside of himself, kind of holding it in his hand and scrutinizing it. Um, and and it brings the division between inner and outer that every person uh, experiences, the bridge between self and other, between individual and collective, and so forth. But in this case, it's got a specific kind of historical character and has um, specific elements, many of them harrowing and oppressive. Um, so you have this adds this layer of division between the inner and the outer to the one that we had gotten a sense of in the previous lines of him being divided uh, internally, um, in some sense because the outer invades the inner for him, in some sense because the values and perspective of the outside culture are internalized by him in a way that he can't help doing. So he this outer self that he's depicting here in this stanza is something of a pretense, it seems, or maybe even a fraud. Fraud is the right way to put it. This language publicly redefining each change in my soul as if I had predicted them. He seems to see himself in a way in a false position at those moments, and he's erecting a fiction that's necessary for him to make his way in the world and advocate for the values that animate him, the moral, ethical, political values uh, that animate and sustain him. And so we have these two moments, as I say, two experiences of self division at play here: the one between the inner and the outer selves, the true self and the self that is shown to others. Um, and then this inner division that may be peculiar to the African American experience. And in form, um, I think what's interesting about this stanza, and I don't have it on paper, this one on paper, so I can't hold it up to the screen. Um, I'm going to, I think, add a link to where you can find this. I believe I found this at poetry.org, so I would look at that because looking at the way it looks on the page, the visual presentation of it is of course part of the whole experience and is interesting in its own right. But I can't show it to you right now. But this particular stanza where he's talking sort of about his public self is the one that's the most, you might say, unruly in form. The enjambments that you find are harsher. An enjambment again is when a line ends um, not at the end of a sentence or a phrasal unit, but it's cut off sooner than that. It's cut off in the middle of it, and then you go to the next line, and there's a sort of a disjunctive quality that it has. Um, they're harsher in that more abrupt in that stanza, and then if you look at the page, the words spill out farther to the right than do any of the other stanzas in the poem, which are more compact from that point of view. So there's a sense of something kind of unspooling or kind of running into the sands, something dissolving. And it's happening just as we're hearing him speak of the way that he tries to present himself in public as a purposeful, focused, integrated, um, and and animated by moral convictions, clear moral convictions, individual. So there's this kind of interesting tension between those two things there, and he does say, that uh, in the stanza that his as he's publicly redefining each change in my soul, as if I'd predicted them and profited biblically, even though their chanting weight erased familiarity from my face. Even in his public self, the role he is playing, which is to some extent imposed on him to a tremendous extent, is imposed on him by the larger society that constructs him as an other, as an inferior. Um, he's losing his sense of himself. Um, and again, this is something I can take in as information and kind of stand in awe at how opaque it is for me. Um, but as I say, that's a valuable thing. That's a good thing for me to do. Um, and I can, and it's a good experience to seek out. So the poem goes on. A question, I think, an answer, whatever sits counting the minutes till you die. When they say it is Roy who is dead, I wonder who they will mean. So I think that's all pretty straightforward. Um, he's contemplating his his life, his the time he has on this earth to do what he thinks is important, and and he when he dies, I wonder who they will mean. Um, he's going to be seen as kind of in an incomplete way. I think he's resigned to being seen as in an incomplete way, in a way that's um, it's going to vary by who's looking at him, and where they're coming from and so forth. Um, and he's it's an expression of his this lack of kind of unified being. I guess I would say um, at the end, and it leaves you with that last statement, and that's a statement, but there's a question mark at the end. Um, and kind of um, that's the disposition that he's in, given the historical circumstances in which he finds himself. One other interesting thing about, again, speaking of the form of this poem, is, and you'll see this if you look at it at poetry.org, is that in the third line of the first stanza, you have an opening parenthesis. Um, you have the lines, what I thought was love in me, I find 1,000 instances as fear, period. Then you have an opening parenthesis that begins then, of the tree's shadow winding around the chair. And we talked about those images and tropes. Um, so you have an opening parenthesis, but you never get a closing parenthesis. And I can't think that that's an oversight or an accident. I think that's um, almost certainly deliberate. And I think it's very suggestive in terms of what's being said here. A parenthesis. There's of course the question mark, but there's the rhetorical um, term also. Parenthesis is something that further explains, further develops um, uh, what's being said, something whatever's been said prior to it. It's subordinate to um, the main statement. And it doesn't have to, in a parenthetical statement, doesn't have to be enclosed within parentheses, by the way. It can be between dashes, it can be between commas. It just has to function parenthetically. So this, I think, the suggestion here is that you get a parenthetical, you get a discourse in effect that is going on subordinate to the main one, and but it never ends. And um, it's in here that he's trying to give shape and contour and substance to the specific kind of disorientation and pain that's in his experience. And it's in a subordinate place um, rhetorically in the poem, and it doesn't have any end, um, which suggests to me that it's something that's insoluble for him. He never gets closure on that. It's a labyrinth, or maybe an abyss, and uh, so I found that kind of suggestive, and I think it added to the power of the poem. I mean, perhaps a lot of people wouldn't mention that, but the copy guy, the copy editor in me, you know, uh, I'm going to look for the closing parenthesis when I see an opening one, and I can't help that. So I think that's interesting, and that's part of this poem. So I'm going to just end it there, and I will read it again. The Liar. What I thought was love in me, I find 1,000 instances as fear. Of the tree's shadow winding around the chair, a distant music of frozen birds rattling in the cold. Wherever I go to claim my flesh, there are entrances of spirit, and even its comforts are hideous uses I strain to understand. Though I am a man who is loud on the birth of his ways, publicly redefining each change in my soul, as if I had predicted them and profited biblically, even though their chanting weight erased familiarity from my face. A question, I think, an answer, whatever sits counting the minutes till you die. When they say it is Roy who is dead, I wonder who they will mean. Okay, so there we have that one. So I think for the next one, because I've been reading about in thinking about this poem, I'm reading this poem, and reading a little bit about Baraka and um, other African American writers and poets. I have been looking at Langston Hughes's first book, which is called The Weary Blues. And I think for the next time, I'm going to pick a poem from that. There's one that I like quite a bit. There's many in there that I like quite a bit, but there's one in particular. I'm not sure that I'm definitely going to do that. But so that's a little preview for next time. And thanks for watching. Um, Share, subscribe, comment, what have you. Thanks.